And that means we can share this afterwards. So if you want to be able to look back or share with any of your colleagues, you can do so after the session. Great. Well, look, first off, let's do a couple of intros. So the panelists, two very handsome looking fellas, if I don't mind saying so myself. My name's James Bent. I head the Solutions Engineering Department. Marketing will say I have a very vast and detailed knowledge of automation. Let's see how that pans out in this session. I can tell you I do keep things simple even when talking about technical topics. So that much is true. And then on the other side of the table is Mr. Andy Dicken.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope all is well and surviving the temperatures, if that's where you are in this part of the world. As James said, my name's Andy Dicken. I run the European sales team for Virtuoso, and I've been in the industry of testing and quality assurance for over 2 decades, which kind of makes me feel a bit old. But despite what people say, I have reasonable knowledge, and I like to share that with some good folks and have some good conversations. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. So great, let's get into things. So today...
James can just...
All good, all good. So I think, Andy, do you want to lead off in terms of what are we going to be covering today? And then I'll shift through the slides as we go through so you can give a bit of an introduction to the webinar today.
Sure, no problem at all. And we've got kind of 5 main areas, really. So current pressures on the insurance industry, coming out the back end of the pandemic, what that might mean for some processes and new technology might be able to enable it. And then with a very heavy focus on our platform, we're going to have a pretty in-depth demo from James to show how we might be able to solve some of the problems. And then we can move into some level of Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to drop that information into the Q&A. Mr. Lonsborough said hello. Hello, Lonsborough. So the chat works. So any questions you have, do put down. With all that said, probably just worth a quick couple of minutes on Virtuoso. So as an organization, our goal in life is to make automation available to the masses. So back in the days of testing, Virtuoso obliviates the need for testers to be code dependent. So no more need for heavy code capability, skill sets, all of that. We solve all of those problems by being able to author 95% of your tests, as you can see on the right hand side of the screen, with plain English. So as it says, if you want a demo of the Virtuoso platform, all you would have to do is click on book a demo. We do clever things like switching iframes and various other bits and pieces, but the fundamental capability is to allow automation to be delivered quicker, faster, and more effectively for organizations to be able to take control of how they deliver automation within their architecture. Go ahead, James, move on. Cool. Okay, so the trend that we're seeing from an insurance perspective, and I've dealt with a lot of insurance companies during my tenure in the industry, is that COVID has given everybody a huge opportunity. So what does that actually mean? Well, within the pandemic, particularly if you're in the motor insurance trade, for example, fewer claims happened, which meant that the profits and therefore the ability to invest back into platforms, back into new methods of working, is now available for these organizations. So cognizant of the fact that normal conditions will return, what we've found in the conversations that we've had with our clients and prospects is that they're becoming very, very aware that the large regression suites or the test suites that have been written in Cypress or Selenium or some other open source software has meant that the maintenance and the maintenance regression around that capability is almost becoming impossible to maintain. So as things change and the economic environment returns to some form of normality, the increase in those claims will start to happen. Therefore, the money to be able to invest is not going to be there quite as much. So as a consequence, we feel, and it's certainly what our prospects and our clients are saying, that it's a really good time to invest in the capability around automation to enable those regression maintenance and the time that it takes to run those on a manual basis or however that's being done in the current organization to be dramatically reduced. Equally, as organizations move to CI/CD or some form of agile capability, they find that the Selenium or the Coded or the Cypress, whichever solution is being worked upon currently, they're struggling to deliver that in sprint testing and to be able to move at the right pace. And you have to have separate automation squads looking at end-to-end capability outside of those traditional DevOps or agile squads. And we have a solution, which we'll come on to. Anyway, James, move on. So what exactly are we going to show you? So as we kind of mentioned, our platform is geared to make automation open for everybody. There's a number of key points which most of the organizations and people that we speak to really hook onto. So number one, we've already spoken about briefly, natural language live authoring. So as I mentioned, roughly 95% of our tests that most organizations run can be written and authored in entirely plain English. So that could be click on home, interact with button, however that might work. Equally, very important to execute and be able to integrate with the current prevalence of the CI/CD tools. Most organizations of a certain size are running in some form of pipeline with the pipeline management tools. Virtuoso will integrate. It makes life a lot easier. It also enables us to be able to deliver reports back into, so they might be reports around defects, there might be reports around test authoring, test creation, test execution. They're all able to come back straight into the pipeline and be able to be delivered real time into a Slack channel or whatever that might be from a usage perspective to enable automation to be delivered really quickly. Equally, and the thing that most people don't quite believe about our platform is the capability to self-heal. And James will show you this more in the demonstration, but the way in which Virtuoso operates as a platform, we capture relevant parts of information down at the DOM level and below. And what that means is that when application changes come through, or a CSS changes or some network ID changes, most times with those traditional scripted capabilities, you have to reauthor. So you have to ensure that your test is going to pass again. And that's where the construct of heavy regression maintenance comes in. With Virtuoso, the opposite is true. So we will utilize our AI-driven bots, which depend upon some level of machine learning and an algorithm. We will take a go at healing that test in order to be able to drop regression maintenance. So one example of that might be with a current prospect that we're talking with. They have somewhere in the order of 180 days worth of manual regression tests to be able to do every month. And they are 80% automated within Selenium. But because of the relative constant change coming through the application, the time it takes to test those changes coming through means that it's just hugely quicker to do that on a manual basis, which defeats the point of having 80% of the application automated through a traditional coded method. A couple of other things that we look at is the management of test data. So clearly, test data, there's various elements around that in terms of obfuscation from a GDPR perspective, in terms of virtualization. Virtuoso gives you a solution to be able to work with, which allows you to deliver test data into a CI/CD continuous testing environment. So something to watch out for. And with that, James, I think we can move on to the next slide, which I think might be your good self.
We can.
There we go. It is indeed demo time. So folks, do put any questions into the Q&A if you have them, and we'll try and deal with those as we go through. But in the meantime, enjoy.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, and I do like that last point you made around the sort of time it takes in, whether it's Selenium or another framework. Maybe it's working, but actually the maintenance burden is really big. What we're going to show you here today, obviously, is a lot of capability driven, but it actually is about the benefit you receive in terms of things like the speed to author and run tests, the reduction of cost per test, the increase of sort of scale of quality assurance, and the reduction of risk in your releases. But look, that said, you're here to see the platform. So here it is. This is Virtuoso that we are looking at. So we are, in essence, a codeless test automation platform, enabling anybody to build tests in natural language, which literally means, and I'm going to take you through just an example. We're using the My Money supermarket, but equally, we're going to show you how we can do functional UI, end-to-end, and integration testing, all in the same test, the same journeys. But for example, here, when we say you can build tests in natural language, we literally mean that if you come into an application and you see that you want to be able to click on, let's say, the car insurance option, then you're literally just writing test steps. So click on car insurance, for example. So rather than having to define an object or look at the code or wait for sort of, find the selectors or so on, you're literally just using our natural language syntax and then just what I see on screen to be able to author your test steps. There's no other setup required. So you can literally just get onto Virtuoso and start writing tests immediately. Now, what we've actually done here is we've just created a sample journey, which is about going through and getting an insurance quote for car insurance. So obviously a front-end website, going through sort of form filling to be able to, in this case, pick all the different cars and insurance types we want to be able to fill in. So being able to go through quite an extensive journey from the user, the customer perspective. And actually some neat things we're doing here is just to sort of call out that this isn't just about simple steps like clicking or writing things in boxes, for example. You're also able to start doing sort of, Andy talked about data driving tests. So you can actually see here, we've got a value 5,000, but we're, instead of using something explicit, we've got a variable, a parameter. And that's actually coming from the fact that even though we're form filling here, we can drive that from test data, for example. So you could be setting up, let's say, a CSV file. Here's my insurance with my car regs, my models, and then some of the fields I want to fill in. I can create those variables. I could be uploading a CSV file with the same. So that what I can do is create data scenarios, which now I can run through the same test just by parameterizing that instead of putting explicit values. I've just done this for a few here, but in essence, you could drive the whole form with test data. Then equally, we can do things like being able to say, as I go through this test, I could also, from a data perspective, I could be generating random data. And for customers, both within the insurance industry, but wider as well, where it is a heavy emphasis on data driving platforms and tests, in essence, doing things like setting up, generic data like first and last names. Instead of having to maintain that, you can literally generate those on the fly with realistic data and then write those into the fields, for example. So there I've generated a random first name and put it into the field. You don't have to worry about generating that data. As we continued through the flow, to give an example of other things that we can do, for example, here where I'm coming through in this insurance form to say, well, what's your job? And I'm putting in saying I'm a manager of sports. I can then store that into a parameter. So you can see here that I'm storing that into a job in a variable. And then I'm actually going to go in this case and click on that, but then I'm going to use that later in the test for populating that in other fields in the applications we're testing. Now, where that's also very useful is the fact that when we get down to actually applying for a quotation, and you can start to see as well, this is quite a long journey, a long test. You can really facilitate more user-focused testing in Virtuoso rather than feature-based tests. And we'll show you how, especially with that self-healing that Andy talked about. But one of the key things we're going to show here is the fact that when we get to the point of generating the quotation, and in this case, getting a quote for the car insurance, then again, we can store that into a variable. So we can see we're storing that amount. And then what we can do in the same test, since we've got to the end of the user flow, we can then jump in and say, well, actually in the same test, I want to progress that. And in this case, we're linking up a front-end portal with Salesforce. But in between those systems, we have APIs. So what we're enabling you to do is combine the functional with the integration testing. And in here, you can see I'm actually passing the insurance quote value into the API as a value. So in this case, whether I want to actually test the API to pass the data, or I want to just test that the data was passed through APIs, and therefore I want to assert on the API responses, for example. It gives you the ability to combine in these journeys, these flows, functional UI and integration, but also the fact that you can be testing in multiple applications, multiple tabs in the same test. So here we've got our insurance results. Then in another tab, we're jumping across into Salesforce, where we're now going to come through and start progressing the quotation. So I can log in, including doing things like passing OTPs to log in through the authenticator apps. But in this case, what we're doing is then we're going in and in Salesforce, I'm emulating someone then manually setting up the policy or the amounts here in Salesforce. But these are the sorts of things we could be asserting on that based on now we want to jump across and go into Salesforce and progress the opportunity based on whether it's insurance sort of transaction IDs or values or names. It's about having not only a user-focused journey, but a full end-to-end business workflow, which could be both from a customer perspective, but also from an internal operational perspective. And then to call out as well, in terms of what can be facilitated in this case, we recognize that in insurance, one of the key things is then, you're generating documentation. So the insurance documents and policies that are coming off the back of the testing. So we also facilitate, and I'm just downloading an example one here from an example site, but being able to go and look for, let's say, a particular quotation or policy document, click that to download, where we are then storing the download file, but then the ability to also show that PDF on screen so we can load it up and see that document, and then we can be asserting against that. So this could be ensuring that when we generate, let's say this is for a household policy, if the amount shown to the customer in the portal and in the business system processing it is a certain value, then we could be storing that and asserting that to make sure that matches, including all the details on the PDF, for example. And here we're also just going through and storing the value from the PDF in terms of the disclosure and then checking it contains expected values. So when we are talking to our customers and prospects in the insurance industry, this ability to data drive functional journeys between multiple systems, work with documentation, but then data drive in different means is exactly the sort of thing, bearing in mind that the key sort of proposition of Virtuoso is building this in natural language. So again, rather than having to rely on sort of going in and building anything coded or having to manually test, you can just come into Virtuoso and start writing these. And literally by that, what we mean, if I'm actually going to start and sort of show you exactly what the experience is like for doing this. So if I come in, we're going to talk about how you can definitely be building from requirements. I'll talk about that in just a second. But what we're going to show first is just this ability that we have to what we call live authoring. So literally, as you are writing in plain English, being able to then go in and see that execute immediately. So for example, if I want to mouse over insurance, which is going to open up the insurance menu, then I literally can come in and say mouse over insurance. And when I do that, you can see it opens the insurance screen straight away. I didn't have to do anything else apart from just use that straightforward syntax and then the label of what I see on screen. And then here I could say click on car insurance, for example, to be able to progress this through. And again, upon doing that, you can see it clicks on the car insurance, and then we'll go ahead and move to the next page. The great thing here is we can actually combine this in Virtuoso with also interactions. So for example, if I want to go ahead and store this text here, I could be doing a click action or wait for it, given the page is loaded. But then I could be saying store that, and this could be my header text into a parameter, and that's going to store that for me. And then immediately I could go ahead and build an assertion to say assert that header text contains maybe the cheap, for example, because that's what everyone likes with insurance. The point here is that as I'm writing this, you can see that all these steps are going green. We're actually writing or capturing the step, then it's executing, showing us that it works, including capturing screenshots, so I can see immediately that I'm interacting with the correct elements. But if it goes green, I know that I've got working automation. So when I click I'm done and rerun this, then I know the tests are going to work. And just to sort of step back and actually show you what is happening here, when we are running the tests, we are using bots to be able to go and look. We're firing up a headless Chrome browser. We're looking from the front end. And we're then looking for each of these elements where we're looking at the DOM level and discovering all of the available selectors for that. So XPath, IDs, class names, and so on. We're automatically building that model of that element. And that doesn't matter even if we come down here, for example, when we've got multiple, in this case, we've got lots of yeses on screen. If all I'm doing is click on yes, how can I get the right one? And the answer is by having this basic assertion to say, look for how, in this case, has the car been modified? And then when I click on no, it's then relative based on where I'm looking on the screen. So even without putting in anything more specific than just using the natural language, you can still successfully identify the elements and build working automation really, really quickly. And from the actual running the tests, so as Andy mentioned, we hook into CI/CD pipelines. So I'll show you here Azure DevOps as an example, but you could be doing Jenkins, TeamCity, Circle, and so on. You can easily hook this into your pipelines. And as you're uploading code and running your jobs, you can be also executing your Virtuoso goals and getting pass-fail responses with execution links. You could equally be coming in and running from execution plans. So scheduling to be able to run your tests. And you could also be sort of setting up in terms of what you want to run. So maybe you just want to run a smoke test with some of the journeys, then you can schedule to do that. But again, when we are running these, and I'm going to go ahead and execute this, where we are literally we're on AWS, we're firing up that headless browser and we're running the test. Literally, we're initiating that immediately. So it just starts running in real time immediately, looking at the DOM level to continue discovering the elements, but also capturing those screenshots from a testing evidence. If we just step back, if you remember, we had our test data, where if we just jump across, we've got 3 different scenarios. You can also be running tests in parallel. So for example, here with my long journey that I've got going here, which is data-driven with those 3 scenarios, I could choose to execute that with test data, run it, and then you're able to run tests in parallel immediately, where you can see here, we're actually running 3 different journeys, each for the different scenario. If we come down to this step here for the car regs, we can see that actually, in fact, if I go down here to the amounts, you'll be able to see when this just gets down to those steps, we are running those scenarios and they are all running. As you can see, this one, and this one are immediately running through. And yeah, if we do just step down to there, you can see that we're using different data sets for those. So we can come across and see that we're data driving those tests in parallel, but then also reporting on them easily. I've just seen a question coming, which I'm going to answer straight away, which is a really good one in terms of, are these checkpoints reusable? And the answer is absolutely. So for example, if I come into my test and I've already written all of this flow down to the point of someone putting in the application and getting the quote, then I could branch a new journey off from there. So this can be my test 2. And therefore I can use all of those steps I've already written without having to obviously write those again. I could also just call in and start looking for checkpoints. So for instance, if I've got my Salesforce checkpoint, I could call that in, attach it, and then I can start building that, and basically embedding those. So yeah, great question. The checkpoints are absolutely reusable. Now, one of the big things, and it's almost saving the best till last in some respects, is when we come to what we call the self-healing, which what we're doing here is to say that as your tests are running on every single execution, we are looking for every single step at the previous working model of the element. And then we're using machine learning algorithms to be able to say, if we can see there are changes, which could be the selectors or element code changes, it could be the label changing for localization, for example. We're using machine learning algorithms to basically identify with confidence, is it still the same element? And if it is, we automatically heal that by updating whether it's the selectors or it could be the labels. It could be things like when we saw the quotation value. If we put in different, let's say, cars that we want to have different policies for, even though the first time I might say, store the quotation, which was $1,000, in that case, it's actually the value that will be healed based on the fact that that's going to change each time we run the test. So this dynamic nature of data, of the elements in terms of the selectors or the labels, is no longer a burden with Virtuoso through the self-healing, because we do enable this to be automatically healed. And it's what's also facilitates in terms of running these much longer tests. So we could sort of come through, and if we just jump back in and show you the longer insurance tests we've been running, it helps to facilitate saying, actually, you can run these much longer scenarios. In this case, you can see that we've got journeys here which are taking 8 minutes to run through, of which this portion for this particular test run was 3 minutes. But if we sort of scroll down, you can just see the length of tests you're able to run, mostly because if there are dynamic elements here, it doesn't cause the test to break. I mean, for example, here you can see that we're storing the value of an email inbox to be able to use to set up an account. In this case, you can see the actual email address is changing each time, and that's what's healing. It's the label on screen. And then equally, if we come down into the likes of Salesforce, then we can see that there'll be, in this case, the values that are changing, or in this case, we can see the ID of a field is changing, which of course happens a lot with Salesforce. So that ability to reduce heavily the maintenance of test is probably one of the most sort of valuable capabilities of the platform, alongside with the ease of use and being able to have these data-driven integrated workflows across multiple applications. But then also from a reporting perspective, if we sort of come down and if we sort of look at this, we can see firstly, I've got a dashboard where I can look across my different testing goals, my test plans, but I can also drill through our project activity, which gives me the ability to filter down through all of the jobs I've run. I could look for different statuses to just show me, let's say, failures, go through the different test plans I've run. And then I could sort of see here that I've got a failure on this one. Let's drill into it. And by doing that, I can open up and I can see that, firstly, I can read this, so can anybody else. So I know what was being tested. I can get all the screenshots so I can see again what was being run. And then when I get to a certain point, I can see that actually there was a certain bit of text that was missing. In this case, it's expected because in the banking website, that actually changes each time and you get a different message appearing. But if you imagine this was actually a bug, you know, the elements there, I know that it was previously working and now I want to assist the engineers and developers. Then we provide our root cause analysis, which gives the ability to drill in. So we can see that actually this is the first time failing. We can see that it was running before. And this is how I can tell that before now and this time, actually the text is changing. So therefore I could just say, well, actually it's an environment issue that actually is expected. So now I should update my test. But if that were a bug, then I can then get access to the page source at the time the test was run. So you've got the DOM there, you've got the page network with all the resources and requests and so on, and then also the page console logs. So, you know, this is about really sort of saying the speed and ease to author, reducing the cost to test because it's really quick to put this together, including the ability to even build from requirements. So you could literally, whether you're working from Gherkin syntax or wireframes or designs, you can be generating your tests prior to development to shift left. But then also the ability to be able to execute in parallel, to data drive test, to scale your testing, use the self-healing to really reduce down the burden of having to maintain tests and then getting these really rich insights from a reporting perspective. These really are, you know, really powerful things. Now, I also see I've got another question, which I'm going to answer straight here in terms of, you know, what happens if, you know, you have some code, you know, so our natural language covers the majority of the testing steps. However, if you've got something specific you need to run, you can actually create what we call extensions to extend the natural language. And these actually are written in JavaScript. So you could create JavaScript extensions to perform specific types of testing steps. So we may have to drill into that further. And if you do have any questions, we're more than happy for you to reach out afterwards as well. We can only answer so much, of course, in a short session. But hopefully you are getting a feeling.
James, we've
yep.
About integration with test management tools. So do we have any ongoing integration with existing test management tools?
We absolutely do. So we integrate with TestRail and also X-Ray. So that's for, in terms of test management for pushing execution results. We're also now just looking at doing the same for Azure Test Plan. And then also we're bringing out integrations into issue management systems. So Jira, GitHub for push integrations for pushing issues. But right now, absolutely, you could integrate into TestRail and X-Ray just as is, including things like Slack integrations for notifications. But we are very market driven, of course, and in terms of, you know, a lot of these tools are very popular and common. So we always welcome inputs in terms of, for our roadmap, how we develop out further. But we have both integrations existing, but more coming as well. Great. So look, that's for today's session in terms of the demo. That's really what we're, intending to show you, and hopefully you can see how this, for the insurance industry, whether that is for sort of more consumer related, whether it's brokers, whether it's underwriters, it really works across, because it's saying any browser-based application where it's data-driven flows and going through sort of working within the insurance sphere, that is absolutely what you can use Virtuoso for testing against.
James, we've just had another quick question,
Awesome.
just with regards to APIs. So what's our construct around being able to pass information or test the information coming back and forth from APIs?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question, Andy. And so we have an API manager where you can set up all your APIs. You can even import them in as collections. So you can build and basically build out your APIs. But the point here is not to just test this in isolation. It is then to be able to put into your, whether it's functional flows, or we are having more scenarios now, more in transactional flows where people are testing at the integration level, where if I scroll down, you can see that you can basically make your API calls, whether you could do a sequence of API calls, passing, let's say, tokens through the inputs or responses. But essentially here, yes, you can make APIs, test in terms of getting the responses, and then whether I'm asserting on those or whether I'm using the details to write on screen, then yeah, absolutely, you can be testing for integrations, whether, again, you're testing a flow of API calls or you're embedding those in your functional journeys to be able to assert, pass, get, post, whatever you're doing in terms of the data. The great thing as well is, just to highlight, we do have really good documentation. We have a really good YouTube channel, which we're happy to share links out to anybody that wants those. So in terms of things like how do we work with APIs, you can see that, both API calls and also using it for data and making sequential API calls. This covers a lot of the capabilities, as well as our documentation, which is really rich. For instance, here we'll show you the full range of natural language that you can cover off. I do see another question's just come in. So leading on, I think, from sort of the data perspective in terms of database integrations. So because we're coming from the cloud, typically our customers don't want us integrating direct to the database. So what we actually do is utilize API calls to pass queries. We're developing up MySQL and Postgres connectors, and to be able to pass the query and then get the responses. So yes, you can integrate with databases via effectively an API call and middleware. Great, and I think we just got another minute or so, and I do see another question come in. So let's go ahead and answer that, which is around visual regression testing. And the answer is yes, we can facilitate that. And actually, within the insurance industry, this gets used particularly around the documentation side. So it can be used, let's say, if you have templates for your documentation, or then you want to be able to sort of assert between the, visually, do they look the same on releases? Or it could be, let's say, customer portals where you want to assure from a branding perspective. Then yes, we do enable you as you're running, let's say, a functional journey to be able to capture what we call snapshots. And so you could set up a functional journey, capture a snapshot to create a baseline, whether that's for documents, whether it's for the look and feel of the portal. And then when you run your next releases, you can recapture snapshots, and then Virtuoso will basically diff between the two states. We're actually looking at the DOM level to capture these, where we're then showing you if there are changes, where you can effectively then look side by side. This is a bit of an obvious one. Someone's updated the products just when you see this come up on screen. So you can do a sort of side by side where it can be basically anything. It could be the products. I mean, in insurance, it could be things like pricing has changed, or it could be, disclosures, whether they're present or not, maybe the layout of a PDF template. The answer is absolutely yes. You can use visual regression testing in conjunction with your functional end-to-end and integration tests. But look, I think we're actually, sorry, we'll do one final question before we say thank you very much. And Andy can tell you how you can get in touch. Does Virtuoso learn from the client code written and add features? You know what? I think it's always good sometimes to say no to something. No, in the short term, we're not dynamically saying if you add in a new field, for example, then we automatically pick that up. However, what we're actually going to be doing in terms of developing out further AI and machine learning, which we're using currently for element discovery and self-healing, is actually that autonomous sort of healing in terms of if we can see a page and a form maybe where you've added new fields into, how to actually autonomously add those in, as well as doing things like autonomously, let's say, form filling. I can see you have a form and be able to fill that in through AI and machine learning. So no to that for the moment, but definitely that's where we're taking this in the future. Otherwise, I think we are just coming to the end of the session. So what I will do is just share my screen again. Great. Which is...
I don't have too much to do apart from say thank you very much. I think that there's much more information on our website. We have various blogs which go out onto LinkedIn, but also you have the ability via the website to book a demo so that you can have it much more in depth for your organization and ask questions which are specific to various things. We have had a question come in around executions limited only to run on cloud. I think given timing, we'll probably pick that up offline. I think all that remains is for me and James to say thank you very much for your attendance and the questions that you've all asked. It's been very, very good. If you do want to learn more, please do drop us a line via virtuoso.qa. Alternatively, you can find James and I both on LinkedIn. And looking forward to hearing from you. Anything else, then please don't hesitate to get in touch. And in the interim, I wish you a good rest of the day.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good day for myself as well. Thank you very much.